Yes, I have to go home. All right, welcome nested loops. We're doing shape up. I'm doing chapter 13 through 15 and the conclusion. So let's get right to it. All right, so chapter 13 is called Show Progress. Let me start off by saying good-hearted managers don't like to ask for status because it feels like nagging. And then because we don't always understand at first, it's even worse when we have to ask more to get clear on progress. So it would be ideal if we could see the status ourselves, and then we wouldn't have to ask people. Now to-dos, especially in Shape Up, they organize them as scopes. It does help the team stay on top of the work, but doesn't help the manager necessarily see status. And this is because there are missing tasks. So you can have a list with completed items, and perhaps that list is all done, or perhaps there's more work that hasn't been defined. Sometimes there is a scope, but it doesn't have any tasks yet. So there's work to be done, but we haven't discovered it. So for Basecamp, QA at the end of the scope also, when you're doing a QA, can generate new tasks for the issue. So we have a look at imagined versus discovered tasks. So in theory, you make a list up front, you populate, and then you check them off. In real life, issues get discovered over time, and the to-do list grow as a team makes progress. So above in the picture there, you can sort of see they have, in theory, I made these 5 tasks, I check off 2, 3, 4, 5 are done. Right, but the reality is you make 5 tasks, we check off 3, we learn more things happen, now we have 8 tasks than we started with. So we get misled on the progress earlier. Like if we hit T2 here, we think, oh, we're 60% done, but then, at T3 here we have more tasks. So I think the problem with estimates is they show uncertainty. Right? Estimates can be confident if you've done a lot of the tasks before, but it can be unclear if you haven't done a task before. And unfortunately, you can't make an estimate. Well, it'll take 4 hours, or maybe it'll take 3 days. So the way they came up with seeing status without counting tasks and estimates is going to follow up here. So they shift to what's unknown and what's solved as sort of the division points. So here, work is like a hill. There's 2 phases. There's the uphill, which is figuring out the approach and what to do. And then once you've hit the top of the hill and you understand all the work involved, and there's a downhill phase, which is execution. So you can see in the picture here, the left is figuring what to do. It climbs up the hill, unknown. We hit the top, now we know. Getting it done is hopefully coasting downhill. So to show the hill example, they've used the dinner party example. We haven't started yet, so at the bottom of the hill. We set the date, but it's a few weeks ahead. We don't know what cuisine or what dish we're going to make, so we don't know anything. So now we figure out our attendees. Well, some of our attendees will be vegetarian, so we're not going to do that big meat grilling thing. So maybe we can do Indian or Italian, but Italian has better vegetarian options. So you can see here we're halfway up the hill. We're kind of picking the cuisine. But you can understand at this point, because we don't even know what dish or food we're making, it doesn't percent complete doesn't make any sense yet. Now we figured out the cuisine. We're going to pick Indian because more vegetarians, right? But we haven't figured out what dishes to make. So we're still on the figuring out side of the hill. Now, once we figured out the dish, then we hit the top of the hill. Oh, I'm going to make, chicken, masala potato or something, paneer or something. So now that you know what you're doing, you're at the top of the hill and you can move forward. So then, buying the ingredients takes this much, prepping and cooking. Now we're, 2/3 done. We eat and then, of course, clean up, and then we're finally done. So let's look at uphill. Uphill is full of uncertainty, unknowns, and problem solving. Until we've gotten to the top of the hill, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Downhill, once you hit the top of the hill, now you have the certainty and confidence, and then you can see and know what will happen, hopefully. So we'll combine the previous chapter's scopes with the hill thing here. Scope gives us the language for the project, locate, reply, all the stuff from last time. The hill gives us the status of that scope on either the uphill or the downhill parts. So we can look here. On the left, we sort of see how we've broken the project into 3 scopes: the permits per occurrence, feature applying, edits, and the global recording. Recurring. But you can see on the scope, on the hill side, you can see feature applying edits is still on the uphill, and the other 2 projects are downhill with global recurring almost being done and about 1/3 done. Right, and for them, they like to plot these as different colors, so you can see the matchup there. And so here's an animated thing of the Basecamp tool. Basecamp has a tool for hill charts. You can see dragging the dots, and then saving the updates. So, figure out your scopes, drag them in place, save the updates. It's drag and drop, it's logged in the project. So you'll save this, I don't know, I guess as often as they want to show these things. And right, so then in Basecamp you can compare these states, and it's powerful. So this kind of goes from bottom to top. Over here you can see these 4 tasks. Blue is already done, yellow looks 2/3 done, these 2 are up the hill. Second time scope, you can see green has moved over the hill, red is coming to the top, and the last one here you can see red actually jumped past green, and green is still kind of where it was last time. So for managers, this kind of way of seeing the project lets you see what's in motion and what's stuck, allows you to self-serve. So moving forward, we have a topic: no one likes to say they don't know. So no one wants to say what they don't know because they're afraid to look dumb, which I feel is kind of anti-agile. We kind of want to know as soon. We kind of don't dwell on the dumb part so long. We want to know as soon as possible to fix it. But fortunately, with a tool like this, you can show your stuff without having to say that you don't know. So you can see in the day 3, day 6, day 9, red hasn't moved. So arguably, this could lead someone to ask the question, though in truth, we kind of have a similar view with our card wall and cards not moving to the right. So it's kind of up to ask when cards aren't moving or they go 5 iterations. So this hopefully prompts you to refactor the scope. So again, with the previous one, we can see that the notify hasn't moved. So we decide to check on this. We go, hey, why is notify stuck? Well, apparently notify is not stuck. Notify is actually progressing, but the problem is it's made of 3 parts and not one single thing. Right? And so in the 3 parts here, the first 2 parts are worked out and working, but so keeping them together, because one part is going uphill, the whole thing's uphill. So we can't tell if it's over the hill or not. So the solution is to break the scope. So before, we can see notify, it's 1/4 of the original scope, and then we separate that into 3 of its own scopes. And again, they've kind of color-coded this. So you can see that the corresponding to-do list kind of gets broken here. So now that you've broken the scope, now you can track these on the hill again, where notify was this one thing uphill, but now we realize it's, hey menu and email notification are going up the hill, but delivery is actually almost done. So split your scopes here, and these can progress independently, and so you can sort of see the other 2 get done, and if the hey menu is the slow part, that sort of tracks on its own. I was looking at these bullets when I made these slides, and I go, oh, boy, I get broken stuff. You know what? I think I cut and paste the slide, and those don't apply. All right, so build your uphill. So they mentioned something called backsliding, where you go to the top of the hill, and you think you know what's going on, but then you slide back down the hill because you just go to unknowns, right? And they say a source of this might be sometimes when we're doing uphill work, i.e. are researching or whatever, it's done all in your head and not in your hands. And I think you've seen that before. So the way to think about uphill is like this. You're 1/3 of the way up the hill when you've thought about it. You're 2/3, the second third, when you validated your approach, you're up, 2/3 up the hill, and the final 1/3 up the hill, you're far enough to believe there are not enough unknowns. So they're implying preferably a fair amount of hands-on working. We often spike our stuff, so get to the point where we're pretty certain we're at the top of the hill. Tanya just sent me an email that I see she wants me to read. So, excuse me 1 second here. Oh, what's that? This thing. Down here.
Forrest, are you distracted by that?
Yes.
I can give you some more information about that when it's appropriate.
Okay. Oh, we're going to have a kind of interview tomorrow. Okay. Just let her know I'll get back to you. Okay. All right. Where was I? Up the hill. I've lost my chart. Where is it? I'm entirely too many of this. I'm still sharing the screen, right? Oh no, it's over here. Yes, okay. All right. What was I saying? Okay, so third here. So you're far enough that you don't believe the other unknowns. All right. So then you want to solve things in the right sequence. So sometimes you have scopes that are riskier than others. If we have 2 scopes, something we may have never done before, and another thing we kind of do fairly common, both will have unknowns and both will start at the bottom of the hill. But the question you might ask yourself, here's this thing that we've never done before and this thing we do all the time, which one could we easily whip together, right? And so then the motivation is to push the scary work uphill first. Better to get a few critical scopes over the top early in the project because they note that work always expands to fit all time available. So if we pick the task that we always do, we can fit more time because we might try to make it better and nicer. But then you don't want a task that you've never done to struggle late at the cycle. So this again is to fit in their 6-week cycle. So they bring up this inverted pyramid that journalists apparently write their articles with. You start at the top with the most essential info, then you add details and background in decreasing order of importance. So this gets the crucial part of the story on the front page, going back to the newspaper motif there, and you can cut the other ends as you need to, details. So teams should solve problems the same way, get the important problems with the most unknowns first, get those to the top of the hill, leave the things that are most routine and least worrisome for last, get your important things done, your nice to have for later. Okay, so that moves us up to then chapter 14, which I think the picture is always a good one, where you can see he's 3 days before deadline, and he wants to know if it's good enough to go. So they reiterate that all the techniques we've learned so far are to help you finish on time. We shape up the work so that you're not wandering and doing things that are not related to the thing you're trying to get out. You integrate one scope at a time so that you don't have like half-finished tasks. You're doing complete things at a time. You're solving your important problems first. But as we know, there's always more work than time. So shipping on time means shipping imperfect stuff. So the question you want to know, is it good enough? So ask yourself, is it ready to release? And one way to figure out if it's ready to release is to compare it to the baseline. So everyone wants to do their best. Pride is important for morale, but we need to direct it. We don't want to constantly perfect everything and get stuck. So the ideal result of perfect, it's impossible to get there, but don't lower your standards just because it's impossible. So instead of comparing to the ideal, compare to the baseline. What is the current reality for customers? How do they solve it without this new feature that we're going to fix it? See how much better the current work that you're making makes it versus the other one will make us feel better when we say, look, this is really better than what I had before. So here's a picture about comparing the baseline, so you can see performance, development time. The baseline is this lower dotted line, and and this is where we are in progress. And of course, we want to compare to this lofty perfection on top, but we should look down and say, look, we're this much better than the baseline. Customers have this, and we're going to be able to give them this. So you want limits so that you can have trade-offs. Right? They have a 6-week bet, and they have that circuit breaker that we still have a hard time with coming to terms with. Whereas if the work isn't done, then the project doesn't happen. So if they must ship in 6 weeks, then we're forced to trade-offs. So as you discover what ifs and edge cases in I forgot what they call it, 6-week bet, their little thing, you have to ask if there's time for it. And you should expect teams to make trade-offs and question scope. You don't want them to cram and push to finish those tasks in the 6 weeks. You should question any new work that comes up before accepting those necessary. So I'd like to say scope grows like grass, it grows naturally. Every project is full of scope that you don't need. But every part doesn't have to be equally prominent, polished, perfected, etc. So every use case isn't equally common or critical. So you obviously focus on some more than others. So you want to give the teams authority and responsibility to cut the scope down. So they should mention that just because you're cutting scope doesn't mean you're lowering quality. And again, Kent Beck always talks about XP cutting scope specifically is to maintain higher quality. So instead of having 3 mediocre things, if we had 2 really good things, that's the better thing. So that's the Kent Beck approach, which more or less I think they're trying to lean towards that. Also, picking and choose what and how far to execute doesn't mean leaving holes in the product. And so if you pick the right things, you make the product better. It just happens that the product is better at some things than others. Picky scope can also differentiate your project, and they're saying this is good for the marketplace if we differentiate it. Be very picky, but ask what things actually matter. And they had a few questions about, like, does it really matter? Does it really make a difference? So it brings up their term hammering. So instead of cutting scope, they think hammering's a better word. It reflects the power and force that you need to repeatedly bang scope to fit in the time boxes. And you should ask yourself the following: is this a must-have? Could we ship without this? What happens if we don't do this? Is this a new problem or a pre-existing problem? And when it happens, which customers see it? Is it the core or just an edge case? What's the actual impact if it happens? And when something doesn't work well for a use case, how aligned is it with is the use case with the intended audience? So, of course, they have 6-week fixed deadlines, and that will motivate us to ask all these questions to make sure what we're doing fits. Making the scope variable allows us to act on them. Chiseling, they introduced another word, I guess to indicate paring down. And hammering scope allows you to stay focused on things we need to ship, something effective. Again, so the effective is the key word for the questions on the previous slide. We want to ship something that we're proud of in the restraints of the time box. So we can compare the must-have versus nice-to-haves. Must-haves are the tasks you're not, type whether you're not done until you finish all those. Nice-to-haves can linger after the 6 week and we consider it's done. They mark them in Basecamp with a tilde. They say because they're optional, usually never get built, but marking them nice to have is an example of scope handling. So here's a screenshot from a Basecamp. You can see that at the top of the list, the one thing that's not done is the tilde mark, reconsider the change link, and then cut off the rest of the stuff that had a bunch of other things checked off. So they say QAs for the edges. So Basecamp has millions of users and about a dozen on the product team. They have only one QA person. QA person comes at the end of the cycle and hunts for edge cases to the core functionality. They say that, QA in their system can limit attention to edge cases because the designers and programmers take responsibility for the quality of their work. So, and earlier on, they were talking about, they like to start the 6 weeks and hand off all responsibility to the team. So the team has responsibility for the whole project instead of, that sort of factory automation. Here's your little chunks, just do the things we send you stuff. So Basecamp didn't even have this QA role until their user base hit a certain size, and that was when the edge cases started to impact hundreds or thousands of users at a time. So QA to them, they consider as a level up as opposed to a checkpoint that you have to go through. So that brings us to 15, chapter 15, move on. So they say, let the storm pass. So now we've shipped. Shipping can generate new work. When you release new features, then you generate new feature requests. So, someone might go, hey, that was great. I'm glad you gave us this. But what about the other things we've been asking for? And of course, bugs will come up. That's more work. Suggestions come up. And if you've changed the workflows, feedback can be quite intense. Oh my God, you've broken this way of doing things. You can get some stuff. So they're saying it's important to stay cool. I remember them having another bullet about, if you let things cool down after a week or so, you'll see what people really care about instead of their knee-jerk. So don't have a knee-jerk reaction to their knee-jerk reactions. They want you to stay debt-free. It can be tempting to commit changes in response to feedback, i.e. Don't respond so quickly without shaping things. You want to have a clean slate. Shape up is always about having a clean slate for each cycle. So, feedback as you get them like that are just raw ideas, so just say no. Just as you say no at first doesn't mean you can't contemplate and then shape them up for future products. Right? So saying yes is taking on debt. The thing that you ship was a 6-week bet. If the product needs more time than that, it's a new bet. So, let requests and bugs compete at the next betting table. And I kind of like that notion, how you let new work, regardless of whether it's features or bug, compete for what we're going to work on. Feedback needs to be shaped. So, raw ideas from feedback need to shape. And then if we remember back, step 1 of set boundaries, that was the raw input when we were trying to learn to shape stuff. So, if such requests are truly important, we can make them the top priority on the shaping track of the next cycle. And while we're shaping that thing that might be important, you can bet on something else for the team to build. And at the end of the cycle, of course, we make the case at the betting table. So then we reach the conclusion of shape up. So the method is tightly interwoven. It may take thought and experimentation to adapt it to our team, which is certainly the case. And these are the concepts we tried to present. Shape versus unshaped work. They only work on stuff after it's been shaped. Setting your appetites instead of estimates, right? What do we have the appetite to build instead of can we do this much work? Designing at the right level of abstraction. They were always talking about, you want to make enough design that they have clear paths without getting lost, but not so much that designers and programmers can't, be creative and feel happy. The concepting of with breadboards and fat marker sketches, which helps them design the right level of abstraction. Making bets with the cap downsides of the circuit breaker, and honoring them with uninterrupted time. So this, I guess, I think is always the hardest part with us. The circuit breaker, that, we hit the 6 weeks and we didn't build it, so it was a bad bet and we shouldn't continue. Probably would save a lot of money to Vegas if we did the same thing. But then also honor these commitments by letting people work. Choosing the right cycle length, which for them is 6 weeks. And then they have this 2-week cycle in between to fix bugs. And breaking projects apart into scopes. Downhill, we just did downhill versus uphill work, communicating about unknowns, and hammering the scope, separate the must-have from nice-haves. So in a nutshell, that shape up. But, what discussion? Do you have anything? Comments, questions?
I like the uphill versus downhill. Although the visual representation is, I don't know, like the thing that you were showing us is like the right way of doing it.
Their little drag and drop hill chart.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's when we think about like their stuff, a lot about Basecamp is like, what's the least amount of work to get something that kind of does what we kind of want them to do. So I can really see how when they were thinking about how do we show uphill versus downhill, well, we can just have you drag them and take basically a snapshot, and then have the manager be able to look at the snapshots. And you can see how we could try to do this point tracking number auto charting stuff, and that would have been like 20 times the work, and it might not have worked much better. Where I said, look, just drag and drop and save it. So, and if you remember the first book, which I think only Diego might remember, Getting Real that they wrote, they were talking about when they said, hey, they wanted this feature, and this feature was like 6 weeks of work, and then we discussed, look, if we did this thing in 2 weeks, this does 90% of what they want. Can we do that instead? They go, yes, because now we get all this time back, and it's almost as good as the really complicated idea. And they mentioned back then they did basically the equivalent of hammering scope then. So look, you want this thing, and yeah, that would be cool, but that's 11 weeks of work. And look at all the other things we could fix.
It's like the 80. We're talking about the 80-20 rule, and you focus on the 80%, but a lot of the finessing comes in the last 20. So I get it, but like it's not a rule that you can go by. It's like at least not all the time. No, sometimes in features and like website stuff, sometimes you can do without the 20%. For as long as there's the last 20%, like I'm talking about functionality. For as long as the 80% are finessed, which then kind of brings it up a little bit more, right? I don't think it's always 80%. Like if you want to do a good job, even the 80% functionality, it's more like 85-15 and 90-10, somewhere around those terms, because you always have to kind of like put all the finishing touches. Whether they're like UI or generally, I feel like they're like unless you have figured out all the part ahead of time, there's always something that even for what you thought was the 80%, it's gonna take longer.
I guess I sometimes don't know, like, what is the condition of the other 20%? What do you do with those? Like, 20% is not really edge cases. 20% is a segment, but or a lot of edge cases. But like, if you don't, for like to what Diego's saying, if it's a web flow, how do you not handle them? Is it better to handle them within the feature set, or is it better to? You might not be able to let it just fall on the floor, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I guess I don't know how you look at that.
Like for in the other book was saying like the 20%, it's kind of like you're not gonna need it yet, right? Like it kind of like it's similar to over here what they're talking about is the 80% good enough that brings enough value to the project and to the product, and then you can handle the 20% later at a later time.
I see. Yeah.
But I don't think you can go like a halfway, like for example, going halfway through the project and say, the project was 100% and let's get to 80. That might not work.
Right. I think that's where, just as a kind of practical view, as an example, that's where you go, and, Jeff has to go back to the mass market team and say, it looks like, we found this and, this can be ready to go, but to do this is going to take another project. So and they go, oh no, it all has to work. And then it's like, okay, but it's going to be 10 people a week. Can you send a manual email for 10 people a week, for a while? And it's like, oh yeah, we can do that. Is that kind of what you mean? When as far as an unknown that comes up during the project that creates some percentage of users that will be impacted in a way that we're not going to expand the feature set to handle right now.
I guess that would be a question for the guy. My guess would be yes. It's like, yeah, we can do this, and not a lot of people are going to get impacted. Maybe like we talk about something that is easily fixable on a manual side until we have time to work on it.
Right.
Kind of like every once in a while, we also do get some bugs or some edge cases that happen, but it's like, it's the first time this can happen in a year or 2 or 3. Do we need, if the fix is that complicated?
Right.
I was like, we might just live with it.
Right.
I think if we could bring some of those questions about must-have versus nice-have, we should get the mass market to ask themselves those questions, because.
Well, I think we definitely do that before it ever gets to product planning. So we've weeded out lots of stuff by the time it gets to product planning. But it sounds like what you're saying is maybe there's another round.
It could be.
At times we should take more seriously.
But I think those don't get asked until we ask them. They could pre-ask. Some of these, some of the.
Well, you don't know what kind of nonsense we flush out.
I'm saying they should ask. Of course, I'm speaking very generically. Do we even have a measure you want to change to blue to red to blue to red to blue, and then $20 here, $30, $20 or $30? Really? That you really think that makes it better? It's just it's really kind of arbitrary, and we know it's arbitrary. And so I feel they never ask the question: does this make a difference? This is your core? Like what I saying, does it affect your core audience? Okay, if someone sees this, is it 1 guy? Is it 4,000 guys? What are they coming from? So.
Yeah.
So I like a lot of the ideas. I don't know about implementation. Maybe when we cover the next few chapters that are about implementation, we'll have a good sense that when we finally talk to Ryan, we can say, hey, so we have no idea how we could possibly do this thing. How did you do this thing? I like the ideas. I'm not certain how we would do that. I like this uphill flow thing. I don't know how we could show that with our existing tool set. Which, in some cases, part of how to implement this is kind of an advertisement for Basecamp. Because Basecamp obviously supports this methodology. It's, they eat their own dog food. So, but I think the part that doesn't work for me in the hill chart is someone has to go and drag these. And it is kind of still gut feeling. Well, how done are we? Well, I'm kind of 2/3 up the hill. I think it's done. I think I'm at the top of the hill. We backslid. I think it's done. I think about some of our run on for many iteration tasks. We swore it was done 4 iterations ago, but we're still looking at the same card. And sometimes, though some of that looks like that one task that wasn't moving, where we split in other things, and some things that go, I don't know, that stuff. So, I think for us, it's like, someone had to drag and drop this chart. Arguably, that would be me dragging and dropping the dots so Terry could see where they are. Yeah, very much so. Anything else?
I like the baseline versus ideal. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed.
So, but I kind of like what I like about that and what Basecamp talked about in the book is they like to they show some creativity and say, well, I know you asked for this, but what you want is this end result. So what if we did it this way, which is easier but not quite as good? Like there's this, oh yes, that is way simpler. It's not exactly what I thought of, but it would work. And they went with those things. And I feel like that is a part of an undercurrent. When they say don't over design, give them the creation, some creativity on how to approach this, and sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised with the 80-20 that comes out of that. Which, again, since they make their own product and answer to themselves, it's easier for them. And I think the opposite is like if you were a defense contractor, we don't give you any of that. The government comes to you and says, look, you're making this. So, all right, anything else? All right, so I look forward. There's a few chapters worth. There's several chapters of if I even have the base camp, but I know there's a couple chapters. There's at least one more session that I think maybe the next 2 or 3 chapters could be done where they start to go, okay, now that you've learned the method, let's implement. So who wants to go next week?
I'm good.
All right. Yeah, take a look. I want to say 2 or 3 of those things could fit. See what you can grab.
Okay, cool. I'll take a look.
Cool. All right. Well, cool. And then I guess that's it. That's a wrap.
Cool.
All right. Cool.
See you.
Thank you.